When I first bought my land on the outskirts of town, the thing that drew me to it was the little private road that led to my cabin, tucked away from the chaos of the subdivision that had been expanding like an invasive species nearby. I worked hard for that land, paid every cent from years of overtime shifts, and the one thing I valued most was the privacy and control it gave me over my own property. The road was mine, surveyed, deeded, and recorded, and it was the one way in and out of my place. At first, the subdivision's HOA didn't bother me much. Their meetings, their ridiculous rules about what color people could paint their mailboxes, or how many lawn gnomes someone could have in their yard, all of that nonsense was contained on the other side of the main road. But as the subdivision grew, so did their arrogance. They started behaving like they owned everything in sight, like their authority extended beyond their covenants and into places they had no business touching. It started subtly. One day, I found cars parked on the edge of my road, halfway blocking my access, with people claiming they were visiting a neighbor and didn't see a problem. I told them kindly but firmly that this was private property and they needed to move. Most grumbled but complied. A few gave me the stink I was inconveniencing them on what they believed was community space. Then about a month later, I came home to find that the HOA had installed a shiny new private community road. HOA members only sign right at the entrance to my land. My jaw nearly hit the dirt when I saw it. They hadn't asked, they hadn't notified me. They just declared my road to be theirs, as if deeds and property lines were suggestions. I marched straight to the HOA president's house, a woman named Carol, but everyone called her Karen behind her back for obvious reasons and demanded an explanation. She opened the door with her smug little smile, pearl necklace glinting under the porch light, and said, "Oh, we voted on that last week. The community agreed that your road is better suited as an access route for the growing neighborhood, so it's now under HOA oversight. We'll maintain it, and in exchange, you'll be a part of the HOA. It's really a win-win." My blood boiled. "That's not how property works," I snapped. "That road is mine, deeded, surveyed, and recorded in my name. You can't just vote to steal it." But she waved her manicured hand like I was a child having a tantrum. "You'll thank us later. This is about the greater good of the community." That phrase, greater good, was when I knew this wasn't going to stop. I went to the county office the next day, deed in hand, and they confirmed what I already knew. The road was legally mine. The clerk shook her head when I told her about the HOA's stunt and muttered, "They've been trying this on other landowners, too." Armed with that confirmation, I went back and ripped down their stupid sign. Not an hour later, Karen showed up in her Lexus, red-faced and screeching like a banshee, demanding to know who gave me the right to vandalize community property. I laughed in her face and held up my deed. "This is my right. You're trespassing." She threatened to fine me, to tow my truck, to take me to court. I told her good luck, because she had no jurisdiction. But the problem was, the HOA didn't care about law. They cared about power. Within a week, they'd organized a so-called road improvement project and sent contractors to lay gravel, paint lines, and install speed limit signs on my road. I tried to stop them, but they called the sheriff, claiming I was interfering with community works. The deputy, clearly in the HOA's pocket, shrugged and said it was a civil matter. That was the moment I realized I was on my own. Every day after that, I found more cars parked along my road. HOA members treated it like their personal parking lot, clogging it up so I could barely get through. I even caught one of them setting up cones for a kid's bicycle race right in front of my driveway. Every time I confronted them, they laughed, saying, "Talk to the board if you have an issue." The final straw came when I found a tow notice on my own truck, taped there by some self-important HOA lackey. The notice said my vehicle was illegally parked on community property and would be removed at my expense if not moved within 48 hours. That was it. They wanted a war? Fine. They had no idea who they were dealing with. What they didn't know was that I had spent years tinkering with heavy machinery, learning mechanics, and rigging systems for fun. What they didn't know was that I had friends with access to a tow yard and more than a little expertise in vehicle relocation. And what they absolutely didn't know was that when you take a man's road without asking, you risk losing a whole lot more than you bargained for. That night, as I stood at the edge of my land, watching the endless row of HOA cars littering my road like cockroaches, an idea formed. If they thought they could steal from me, maybe it was time I showed them just how quickly I could make their precious possessions disappear without leaving a trace. The plan came together faster than even I expected, mostly because I was so fueled by a mix of fury and determination that sleep wasn't even an option until I had something concrete in motion. I started by making a list of every car I saw regularly cluttering my road. Karen's Lexus, the HOA treasurer's oversized SUV, the vice president's shiny Tesla, and at least a dozen more from the board's loyal lapdogs who seemed to think my land was a free parking garage. Each time I drove home, I snapped pictures, took down license plates, and noted where they usually parked. It wasn't hard. These people were creatures of habit, predictably smug and careless in how they left their toys lying around. Next, I called up an old buddy of mine named Rick, who ran a salvage and towing operation just outside the county line. Rick was the kind of guy who didn't ask too many questions as long as you paid him fairly, and over the years, I had helped him repair more engines and hydraulics than I could count. When I explained the situation, he let out a long whistle. So they stole your road, huh? And now they're parking all over it like they own the place. Damn, man, that's bold. You want 'em gone? I got a yard big enough to swallow every last one of them, and a few flatbeds sitting idle. He didn't even need to hear the rest before he agreed. By the following weekend, we had 3 flatbed tow trucks lined up and a quiet plan to roll in late at night when everyone was asleep. The best part? Rick had access to a storage yard that was completely off the books. No paperwork, no questions, just a chain link fence and a padlock. Once those cars were in there, they weren't going anywhere unless I decided otherwise. The first night was almost too easy. Around midnight, under the cover of crickets and a thin sliver of moonlight, Rick and I crept down the road with 2 flatbeds. My heart pounded in my chest, half from nerves, half from the thrill of finally taking back what was mine. The first car we hooked was Karen's Lexus. I'll never forget the satisfaction I felt watching it get winched up, tires dangling helplessly, as if even the car itself realized its pampered life was over. By dawn, we had taken 4 cars, including the Tesla and the treasurer's SUV. We didn't scratch them, didn't break windows, didn't do a thing to damage them. We just quietly lifted them and drove them away, leaving behind empty gravel spots like ghosts had carried them off. The next morning was glorious. I sipped my coffee on the porch while chaos erupted down the road. HOA members paced in circles, phones glued to their ears, shouting about stolen cars. Karen marched up and down like a general inspecting troops, barking orders to call the police, call the tow companies, check with the neighbors. I leaned on my railing and pretended to be just as confused as everyone else when she stomped up to me demanding answers. "Did you see anything last night?" she snapped. I shrugged. Heard some trucks, but out here that's not unusual. Maybe someone finally got tired of all the illegal parking. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. For days, the HOA went into a frenzy, filing police reports, pestering the sheriff, holding emergency board meetings. I knew their limits, though. They had no proof, no cameras on my road since they had never bothered to ask permission to install any, and the police weren't going to launch a full investigation without evidence. Cars get stolen all the time, and the officers treated it like a routine case, not some HOA apocalypse. While they scrambled, Rick and I doubled down. Over next week, we hit them 2 more times, always rotating nights, always taking different vehicles. By the end of it, nearly every car that had ever blocked my road had vanished without a trace. Some members were reduced to walking half a mile from a main road because they were too scared to park anywhere near my land. Others started carpooling or taking Ubers, muttering angrily about the plague of thieves haunting their neighborhood. Meanwhile, my road was finally clear again, just the way it was meant to be. Of course, Karen wasn't about to let it go. She came storming up to my porch one evening, red in the face and screeching accusations. This is your doing. Don't you lie to me. You've been behind this from the start. You think you're clever hiding our vehicles? Well, we're going to get to the bottom of it, and when we do, you'll regret ever crossing the HOA. I let her rant until she ran out of steam, then leaned forward with the calmest smile I could muster. Karen, I don't know what fantasy world you live in, but if you really believe I'm behind this, maybe you should stop parking your stuff on private property. After all, if those cars hadn't been here, they wouldn't have disappeared, would they? She sputtered like a broken sprinkler, too furious to form a coherent response. I knew I was pushing her buttons, but I also knew she had nothing, no witnesses, no evidence, no case. And the more I watched her unravel, the more I realized I wasn't just protecting my road anymore. I was teaching the HOA a lesson they would never forget. The neighborhood started buzzing with rumors. Some said there was a gang of car thieves targeting the area. Others whispered about a disgruntled tow company taking revenge on the HOA. A few even speculated that the place was cursed, that anyone who parked on my road was doomed to lose their vehicle to some unseen force. I didn't bother correcting them. Let the legend grow. The more fear spread, the less I had to worry about anyone trying the same stunt again. Still, deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to back down, not when her pride and power were on the line. And if she couldn't pin the missing cars on me directly, she would come up with another way to strike back. What she didn't realize, though, was that I was prepared for every angle she could possibly try. She wanted a war? Then she was going to get one. But it wouldn't be fought in courtrooms or HOA meetings. It would be fought right here on the ground on my land where I had the upper hand. When Karen realized the police weren't going to miraculously retrieve the missing vehicle, she shifted strategies, and that pivot was when things got truly personal. She started weaponizing the HOA's bureaucracy like a blunt instrument, filing frivolous violations and levying phantom fines against me for everything from unauthorized landscaping to obstructing community aesthetics, each notice arriving with a smug, stamped signature and a deadline designed to sting. The first couple I ignored. After all, the county records and my lawyer pal had already told me what mattered, but then she escalated by calling my lender and suggesting I was a problematic owner, and someone from the HOA actually had the gall to say they were reviewing my membership status despite the fact there was nothing to review. That's when the quiet war turned into open harassment. Anonymous complaint forms appeared in my mailbox. A crew of volunteers showed up to take pictures of my property under the guise of assessing community compliance, and one of Karen's minions even claimed to have seen unauthorized construction on my land. An accusation so absurd, even the sheriff laughed when I showed him my clean permits. Meanwhile, the board held secretive safety hearings in the clubhouse where they plotted more creative forms of pressure, blocking access easements, petitioning for county code enforcement visits, and sending certified letters threatening liens. Their tactic was clear. If they couldn't take my road by vote, they'd take my patience and my wallet until I either sold or folded. But the more they leaned on legal smokescreens, the more I saw how brittle their power actually was. The fines they threatened required quorum and votes, the liens needed legal grounds that didn't exist, and most importantly, their moral high ground had been irrevocably ruined by the disappearing cars. People whispered now, even among the HOA members, that maybe the board had brought the chaos on themselves. That slip in the narrative was my opening. I began to play their game, but with rules they did not expect. I answered every certified letter with calm, documented responses, CCNG, the county recorder, the local paper, and a handful of attorneys who had once done me favors. I made sure every interaction was recorded and traceable. If Karen wanted a war fought in paperwork, I would fight her with an avalanche of properly filed counters. At the same time, I tightened the security at the fringe of my property. Motion sensors, low-profile cameras tilted to show only my road and my gate, and signs that warned of private property and towing at owner's expense. Ironic given the past weeks, but effective. Not because I feared them physically, none of them had the stomach for a real confrontation, but because I wanted evidence and evidence neutralized their petty authority. The cameras captured a lot of small, telling moments. Karen's minions sneaking around my fence under cover of darkness, a tow company truck that had been contracted by the HOA, idling suspiciously near my entrance, and once, to my surprise, the vice president himself pacing my driveway with a clipboard, muttering into his phone about what to do next. Each clip I sent out to the county and to the sheriff's office tightened the screws on their credibility. Public opinion within the neighborhood began to shift as quietly as the seasons. A few of the HOA members who had once cheered Karen's boldness started coming around my way, apologizing half-heartedly for the inconvenience of the parking and for the heavy-handedness of the board. One elderly couple knocked on my door and confessed that they hadn't known the whole story and that they'd been upset about the missing cars, too. They didn't want trouble, they just wanted their lives back. Those moments were small salves, but they mattered. The more human faces I could put on the side of the road, the less the HOA's narrative of vandalism stuck. Karen grew more paranoid, and paranoia is a corrosive thing. She began demanding loyalty pledges, threatening to expose the names of dissenters, and even proposing a moratorium on anyone who had acted suspiciously while the board investigated the thefts. Her conduct made the local paper one rainy Tuesday when a reporter, drawn by the whispers and the missing vehicles and the absurdity of a private road that everyone suddenly claimed to own, published a piece that painted the HOA as heavy-handed and petty. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Overnight, the HOA's phone lines flooded with questions from outsiders, and a couple of county supervisors called asking about the legality of an association operating beyond its remit. The pressure that had once been concentrated on my tiny cabin diffused into the boardroom. The membership at large began to ask why their dues were being spent on petty legal battles rather than on the promised amenities. With their leverage slipping, Karen lashed out in another way. She hired a private investigator and dragged the county court into a procedural minefield, seeking temporary restraining orders and property freezes on the pretense that my actions created immediate danger to the community. Her lawyer painted me in hyperbolic tones, calling me a rogue landholder in need of restraint. But even the PI came back empty-handed. No surveillance footage tied me to the missing cars, no physical evidence linked my property to their absence, and the court, smelling desperation, denied most of her emergency motions. The judge's decision was terse but telling. Property law cannot be overridden by private votes, and suspicion without evidence does not create a right to impose penalties. That ruling was a turning point. Karen slammed her fist on the table and ranted about getting an appeal, but the momentum had shifted. The next HOA meeting, which had been intended as a forum to condemn me publicly, turned into a meltdown. Members debated in heated tones, some calling for a complete overhaul of the board, others demanding transparency about the money being spent in these legal affairs. I sat quietly on my porch that evening, watching the clubhouse lights blink off one by one, and felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. I had won a battle, yes, but the skirmish had exposed ugly truths about my neighbors and about how easily a few people could twist community systems to their will. There was a cost in my soul for what I'd done. The deliberate removal of property, even when justified by defense, left a weight that didn't disappear with the return of clear access. Still, the road stayed open, and for the first time in months, I could drive down to the river without dodging SUVs and Teslas. But I knew Karen wasn't finished. She had lost this round, but she still had options. Legal appeals, smear campaigns, and a stubbornness that felt endless. I had to be ready, not with tow trucks or shadowy yards, but with the quiet, relentless accumulation of truth, evidence, and the grudging support of those who now understood that property and decency mattered more than petty power plays. In the end, it wasn't brute force or secret tow jobs that brought the HOA to its knees. It was the slow unraveling of its own arrogance, a thread pulled tighter and tighter until the whole fabric tore apart in front of everyone. Karen had doubled down after the court setback, ranting to anyone who would listen that I was some kind of vigilante saboteur who had single-handedly declared war on the neighborhood. But the problem with her fury was that it was no longer convincing. People had lived the reality. They'd seen their cars vanish, sure, but they'd also seen the board's reckless spending, the ridiculous power grabs, the phony fines that had no legal teeth, and the constant pressure on anyone who dared question authority. The more she shouted, the more foolish she looked, and when the treasurer resigned suddenly with a note about financial mismanagement and unapproved expenditures, the floodgates opened. Rumors of missing HOA funds swirled, and more than a few members wondered aloud if Karen's obsession with me was just a smokescreen to cover her own mistakes. I watched all of this play out like a man sitting by a campfire while a storm raged in the distance. I didn't have to stir the pot anymore because they were tearing themselves apart without my help. Still, I wasn't about to let my guard down. I had Rick quietly start releasing the cars back, one at a time, parked in random places around town, never damaged, never stripped, just reappearing like they'd wandered off for a vacation and found their way home. The shock on people's faces when their stolen vehicles suddenly showed up outside grocery stores or at the county fairgrounds was priceless. The sheriff chalked it up to some bizarre prank ring, but without damage or ransom notes, there wasn't much to investigate. As those cars trickled back into the neighborhood, the legend of the vanishing road curse only deepened. Some whispered that the vehicles had been hidden to teach a lesson, others swore there was a supernatural force at play, and a few even claimed Karen had orchestrated the whole thing herself to gain sympathy. I never confirmed or denied anything. Silence, I realized, was the most powerful weapon of all. It let people fill in the blanks however they wanted, and their imagination was often harsher than anything I could have invented. By spring, the HOA was in full collapse. Half the board had resigned, special meetings devolved into shouting matches, and dues payments started drying up as homeowners refused to bankroll the chaos. Karen clung to her title like a drowning woman clutching driftwood, but even her allies began peeling away when county auditors announced a review of the HOA's financial records. She showed up at my porch one final time, gaunt and frantic, her once perfect posture slumped under the weight of months of stress. "You think you've won," she spat, voice trembling, "but this community will never forgive you. You'll always be the outsider, the troublemaker, the man who cursed us." I met her eyes steadily and said the one thing that cut deeper than any accusation. "I never wanted to be part of your community, Karen. I just wanted to be left alone on my own road. You couldn't respect that." She recoiled like I'd struck her, muttered something incoherent, and stalked off the last time. 2 weeks later, she resigned under the guise of health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Her empire had crumbled. Life after the HOA storm felt eerily quiet. For the first time in years, I could walk my road without feeling eyes on me, without dodging cars or fending off bogus letters. The gravel crunched under my boots like it used to, steady and familiar, and the cabin finally felt like the refuge I had built it to be. A few neighbors stopped by now and then, offering olive branches or baked goods, as if to make up for the months of tension. I accepted politely, but never let anyone get too close. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily rebuilt. Rick and I laughed about it over beers one evening, the two of us sitting by the fence line as the sun dipped low. He said, shaking his head, "People talk about battles like they're fought with guns and fists, but you fought yours with wrenches, silence, and paperwork. That's some next-level Warcraft right there." I chuckled, though there was truth in his words. It hadn't been about revenge. Not really. It had been about drawing a line, about proving that a man's land and his rights still meant something even when drowned under the noise of committees and votes. And as I looked down that long, empty road, stretching quiet and undisturbed into the woods, I felt a deep satisfaction settle in my bones. They had taken my road without asking, but in the end, it wasn't theirs to take. I had vanished their cars, but what truly disappeared was the illusion of their control. What remained was mine, as it always had been. The land, the road, the freedom, and as far as I was concerned, that was victory enough.